Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today we have a new guest, Brandon Smith. Brandon is the founder and chief strategist behind the Alternative Market Project. His goal is to create a border networking hub, an educational gathering place for every American across the country who wishes to decouple from our current collapsing financial system and build something better. His website is altmarket.com. That's alt-market.com. I'll be putting all the links at the bottom of the video. And I am very happy and honored to have Brandon on the X22 Report Spotlight. Brandon, welcome to the Spotlight.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Brandon, thanks for being here. Let's start off with a couple of your predictions. You predicted the Brexit. You predicted that Donald Trump was going to be elected, and those predictions came true. Here we are with Trump right now. He is elected, but he's not the president-elect just yet until December 19th. But we see Jill Stein, George Soros, the establishment, they're trying to push this recount before December 19th. They also have things planned after this, like the protests coming up January 20th of 2017 when Trump is inaugurated. Why do you think they're doing this? What is the push? What are they trying to do here?
Well, I don't think that the goal of the elites is to prevent a Trump presidency. I think their goal at this point is to perpetuate an atmosphere of tension between left and right. And I think that they're going to continue this. You're going to see this schemes like this all throughout the next year or the first year of Trump's presidency. And I think their only goal is to continue to increase pressure and tension between left and right, because the end game, at least my theory on the end game, is that the left is going to become even more extreme through this process. They already are. To me, they seem completely out of their minds. There's no rationale to anything they do anymore. But I think they're being pushed even further to the extreme left, to where you get almost a sort of a militant communism. They're not going to be social justice warriors anymore. I think they're being pushed into militancy. And I predicted the Trump presidency based on the partly on the premise that the elites need a scapegoat for the financial crash that they've engineered. They're removing all the pillars from under us in order to create this crash in the near future, and they need a scapegoat because I don't think they plan to take the blame for this crash when it happens. The perfect scapegoat would be conservatives or what they would call nationalists or populists. Conservatives in general are the primary enemy of globalists because we believe in small government and, for the most part, decentralization. So why not, if you're the elites, why not take the crash you created and then blame your worst enemy for it? And that was the basic premise and the reason why I predicted that Trump would win. So I think that right now, all of these schemes you're seeing with recounts and protests and everything else, it's just to continue perpetuating the tensions between left and right, and push the left towards militancy while pushing the right towards authoritarianism. Sort of a early Europe, early Germany and Italy, 1920s to early 1930s situation, where conservatives decide that they're going to abandon their principles of liberty and start exerting force of government in order to combat the threat of the left.
So it sounds to me like you're saying they like to keep America divided right now. That's one of their main goals. Keep each side, have them fight amongst each other.
Yes, and in the process make the right, or conservatives, the villain of our story, the villain of our theater that they've set up here.
Okay, so you talked about the crash, and let me just go back to 2008 for a moment here, when Obama took office. And since that time, the corporate media, the Fed, the U.S. government, they were out there telling us that the economy is improving. I mean, even Obama came out at the beginning of this year, said, anyone that doesn't believe that the economy is getting better, you're peddling fiction. Right now, on paper, through statistical information, the unemployment's down to 4.9%, GDP they revised up to 3.2%, and they're continually making it seem like everything is fantastic. When you look at the economy since 2008 up until this point, do you see an economy that's strong, that's growing? Is what they're telling us true?
Absolutely not. I would really recommend there's so many stats and numbers to go through and break down, especially the mainstream numbers, why they're misleading, why they're or completely wrong. I would recommend people go check out an article series that I wrote last year called One Last Look at the Real Economy Before It Implodes. There's parts 1 through 6. I break down every single government stat, mainstream stat, why it's misleading or why it's wrong. I break down the real unemployment, real supply and demand. I go into oil markets, everything, and break down what the real issue is and why there is no recovery. Basically, since 2008, we've been skating on stimulus. We should have had a much bigger crash in 2008. It wasn't allowed to happen. We've been kept on life support ever since. And the situation has only grown worse. And just to give you a point of contact on that, it's funny, the initial, just today, the initial jobless claims numbers they had right before the election, they had dropped to 43-year lows, and now this month, after the election, they spiked over 15%. So after Trump gets in, suddenly, all of a sudden, is just everyone's jobless again. It doesn't make sense unless you look at it from the narrative of, well, they're setting it up to where a crash occurs during the Trump presidency, and Trump and conservatives are blamed in the process.
You're saying you do believe there's a crash that is coming, and what you're saying and what I'm hearing is that you think it's going to happen in 2017 during Trump's presidency.
I believe, well, when I talk about a collapse, people have to understand that economic collapse is a process. It is not an event. When you mention collapse, they say, "Oh, you've been talking about a collapse since 2008, and it's never going to happen." It's been however many years, and what they don't understand is that economic collapse is a process. It happens over several years or a decade usually, and the market collapse, the stock market collapse, is usually the last thing that happens in that process. Right now, we're in the middle of that process. I think that in 2017, it's going to accelerate. I think that we'll start to see stock markets affected at that point. So the mainstream, regular people, all they really track as far as the health of the economy is stocks. They look at CNN or MSNBC or whatever. They see stocks are at all-time highs. Stocks are green. That means the economy is good, and then they walk away. They don't look at anything else. This coming year, I think that stocks are going to start crashing, and that's when the people in the mainstream are going to start to question the validity of that recovery idea.
Do you think this is going to be a natural crash where things just naturally fall apart on their own, or do you think the elite are going to bring the system down?
Well, it's funny because they've actually been artificially propping up the system since 2008, and the system has become so utterly dependent on stimulus measures from central banks around the world that really the only thing they need to do now in order to create a global crisis is just to remove the stimulus. That's all they have to do, is just shut off the spigot, and a crisis will occur naturally. So I think that they're just going to pull the plug on the life support and step back for a little while at least, and just watch what happens.
When this happens, how bad is it going to be? Is it going to be like 2008? Is it going to be like the Great Depression? Is it going to be worse than both of those times?
I think it'll be definitely worse than the Great Depression. I don't think, that I think people have some cinematic ideas of what a economic collapse is like, or what a crash would be like. I think a lot of people envision some kind of a Mad Max scenario. I don't think that's necessarily how it's going to be. I do think it'll be, noticeably worse than the Great Depression.
When this collapse happens, do you see bail-ins at all occurring here in the United States with the banks?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I think you will see definitely government pensions, things like that being confiscated in order to pay other debts. And I think maybe towards the end of the game, you will see banks starting to lock off accounts, or giving haircuts to larger accounts, as we saw in Greece and Cyprus. It's hard to say how far that could go. In the U.S., I do think it could go as far as account confiscation.
Do you also think that there might be shortages? I mean, the people say when this hits, we'll have some type of credit freeze, and it will be very difficult to get products, because once credit freezes, trucking, deliveries, that kind of all breaks down at the same time. Do you see that coming?
Yes, I could definitely see that coming. I think that what the end game would be in the U.S. at least would be a nationalization of certain freight and resources. The government's already set up, as far as national emergencies. They're already set up to do that. They're already set up to confiscate and manage resources from the private sector. So I think that would be the end game.
Are you in the camp of inflation or deflation? Where do you see this going? Do you think we're going to see a deflationary type of crisis, or do you see inflationary type of crisis?
I would actually see it as stagflationary, which would be sort of a combination of, it would be the worst of both worlds. I think probably some elements of Weimar Germany hyperinflation, and then Great Depression deflation.
How long do you think this will last? I mean, many people ask me, they write in and they say, how long will this crisis last? I mean, will it be a week? Will it be 2 weeks? When the market falls, I'm talking about, and the corporate media and the U.S. government, they all recognize, like, look, there's something wrong here. How long will this last?
Well, the international financiers, the central bankers, the global elites, they openly have suggested in the past, and articles published in publications like The Economist, the goal of a world currency system by 2018. So I would expect first that whatever's going to happen is going to happen between now and early 2018, because that's their window of time to create enough chaos and desperation in order to convince people, or to rationalize the idea of switching to a global currency system. After that, I would expect there would be a process of acclimating the public to this new system, and I would expect that we'd probably be, a lot of countries would probably be in third world conditions for a while after that.
Now, you talked about a new currency. What are you envisioning as a new currency? I mean, Jim Rickards is out there and he's saying that the SDR is going to be the global currency. Do you agree with that?
Yes, and actually, if you go back to, I believe, 1988, The Economist published an article, I believe, titled "Get Ready for a Global Currency in 2018." And in that article, they outline exactly what their plan is, what they plan to do, which is to introduce the IMF's special drawing rights the basket currency system as a bridge to a new global currency system. So they'll get national currencies all coupled into the SDR system, and the IMF pegging these currencies and dictating what their values will be according to the SDR system. And once they've done that, they'll start moving people, getting them acclimated to just a single global currency system.
What happens to the dollar at this point? Do people still have the dollar? Do we still use the dollar?
Well, I think the plan is to kill the dollar's world reserve status, and that will severely limit the dollar's value on the global market. I would say that we'll probably still have our dollars, our green dollars with the presidents, that we'll still have them for a while. We'll still be able to look at them and say, hey, we've got a currency, but the value will no longer be dictated by the, or controlled by the Federal Reserve. I think the Federal Reserve will step aside for the IMF, and the IMF will become the new sort of global mediator of currency values.
What's going to happen here in the U.S.? Everyday people that are out there working, they're going and going to their job, they're using the dollar. Is the people's way of life, is it going to change when we move to a new currency?
In certain parts of the world, most definitely. I think in the United States will be hit the hardest because we are so absolutely dependent on the dollar's world reserve status for our level of luxury that we've lived in for at least half a century. So I think for people in the U.S., it'll be an extreme shift from first world down to basically third world living conditions. And I think it will be a disaster. A lot of people will, there are people who will die in this process. Just as during the Great Depression, you had a lot of people die during that process and move into poverty, starvation. It's going to be a disaster.
How do you think people are going to handle this? I mean, think about all the people that are sleeping, who are just going about their everyday lives, not even thinking about a collapse because they've been told that everything is fine, and then all of a sudden their world collapses around them. They're not prepared for this. How do you think these people are going to react?
Some will react violently, but I think the elites have staged the situation in such a way that a lot of people will be confused as to who to blame. And that's the great advantage that they have, is that they've staged the situation to where especially people on the left, they're automatically built in, they have an automatically built-in bias to blame, either Donald Trump or Republicans or conservatives in general. On the right, I think you're going to have a lot of conservatives blaming the left as being saboteurs, sabotaging Trump and ruining his chances of fixing things. You're also going to have all kinds of different, I think, events in between, black swan events, terrorist attacks, things like that sort of can really keep people confused and looking every other direction except at the global bankers. And that's what they want. They don't want anyone focused on them. They're going to create as much chaos as possible during this in order to keep everyone at each other's throats. While they're sitting back, they're going to be, lounging on the Riviera, sipping a nice drink and just watching.
What is the reason they don't want anyone blaming them? Why do you think they don't want people to understand what they're doing? Why do they want to keep everyone distracted?
Well, I think because we are getting to a point in history where the globalists are more exposed than ever before. There's the access to real information on on what they do, their schemes, who they are, the organizations that they've built. It's all out there. If if the general public becomes aware of who they are and the fact that they're behind this crash, it would be all over for them. I mean, you're talking torches and pitchforks, and it would be all over for them. So they really do need to keep they need to keep mass confusion. They need to keep everyone focused on each other and not them. Otherwise, their entire apparatus of control falls apart. So that's one reason why, the information war, as it's called, is so important. If we can get enough people aware of, and focused on the bankers first, not the left, not the right, but the bankers first. And yes, there's going to be useful idiots that we got to deal with in the process. There's going to be crazies on the left and so on and so forth. But get them focused on the bankers, then we might be able to at least remove them from the picture and rebuild in a proper manner. Because really what this is all about is who's going to rebuild. The system's going to crash regardless, but we still can determine who rebuilds afterwards. If it's them rebuilding, then we're kind of done for, because they're going to use the crisis as a rationale for centralizing everything into their one world system. If we can remove them from the picture, then we might have a chance to rebuild, with a freer system.
Do we as a people, and not just the United States, but other countries, do we actually need the private Western Central Bank?
No. No. Simple answer, no. The only purpose that a central bank serve is to control money supply, interest rates, and to manipulate geopolitical environments in nations. That's the only reason they exist. They're a tool for manipulating governments and public, social consciousness and economic consciousness. That's the only reason they exist. They only serve the interests of the elites. They do not serve the interests of the public in any way.
Why does Congress, the executive, why do they keep the central bank around? What incentive is there to keep it around?
Well, there's a lot of incentive for political leaders. I would suggest people who are maybe skeptical on this whole concept of globalists, evil globalists in a smoky room planning world domination. If they find that they're skeptical about that, I'd actually suggest they read a book called Tragedy and Hope by a man named Carroll Quigley. He was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He was a mentor to Bill Clinton, and he breaks down in that book exactly what the global elites, what their plans are, and how they've been able to insinuate themselves into the politics of almost every nation with the central bank and dictate basically through various incentives up to and including putting these politicians into power. That's how they've been able to control governments, and by extension, that's why governments have never moved to shut down these central banks.
What is their end game? What do they want with the people? What do they want in each one of these countries? The United States, Canada. What exactly do they want?
Well, if you're talking, what do they want 100 years from now? I think in 100 years, I think their goal is to have a total economic domination, a one world government, and a reduced population. And we could go further into that. The population, that's a big one, but carbon taxation agenda, Agenda 21, Club of Rome. If you look into all of that, there's ample evidence that they would prefer to have a much smaller human population. I suppose ostensibly because that would be easier to control. smaller population. Um, but I think they see themselves, and if you read some of their publications and some of their the philosophies that they promote, I think they see themselves as sort of philosopher kings from, the philosopher kings from Plato's Republic. They see themselves as born to rule and the smartest men in the room, and they believe that the system, the ideal system, would be them sort of as, maybe as Egyptian pharaohs, just kind of god kings lording over the rest of us, and they don't like to be. I don't think they like hiding in the shadows. I think they believe they deserve to be revered, and they're moving the world towards a situation where they will be, if they get their way.
Do you think they would go as far as creating or pushing a civil war here in the United States?
Yes, I do, and I recently, my last article was on that subject in particular. It's called "The Reasons Why Another American Civil War is Possible," and I think that, again, I as I mentioned before, I think they're pushing the left towards militancy, but not with the intention of having the left win. I think they actually intend to throw the left to the wolves, as it were. I think they're going to sacrifice the left. The left's usefulness has subsided, and I think the only use for the left now is to push conservatives and people on the right towards abandoning our principles of small government and liberty and becoming authoritarians. Because really, the war, for the globalists, the war is on the ideal of conservatism, individual liberty, and sovereignty. For them, they have to. It's not enough to just to fight conservatives or to fight people on the right or libertarians, whatever. It's not enough for them. What they have to do is destroy our principles and destroy our ideal and make them akin to something terrible. So in the future, when people look back at conservatives, they'll say, "Oh, look at how horrible they were. They were just like the Nazis or whatever." And in order to do that, they have to. They can't do that. They can't just demonize us themselves. They can't just destroy our principles outright. They have to get conservatives to abandon those principles altogether and act like Nazis. And I think that's the purpose of a civil war in the United States, would be to get the left a militant and to push the right into authoritarianism.
I also see that the U.S. government, the central bankers, the elite, that seems like they've been trying to convince everyone that the people, they don't have rights. They're actually privileges. And we see this through Common Core, which is now in most of the schools. And a lot of the textbooks are teaching the young that you're not born with them. They're actually privileges that the government hands to you. And through this, fake news, conspiracy theory, free speech zones, the call to get rid of weapons. It seems like they've been trying for a very long time to try to remove the rights of the people. Do you see this also?
Yes, and I would see it more as an indoctrination of more specifically millennials, and pushing millennials towards the extreme left, which again, I don't think the end game is for the left to become dominant. I think that they're going to throw the left in the garbage, and in the hopes that through the left's insanity, the right will become authoritarian in the process. It will become the villains of the story.
If the central bankers, the elites, get their way, things are not going to be good for America or the world. How do you see the U.S. if the elite and the central bankers do get their way, where they crash the system, they introduced a new world currency? What will America look like at that point?
If they get their way, I imagine that you will see some people will fight back. I'll probably be among those people, but it will not be fun. It will be horrible, and you're going to have insurgencies in the United States. You're going to have probably certain parts of the United States, probably certain major cities, turn into something like a green zone, like you see in Iraq, where the people who are willing to disarm, who are willing to placate and follow the rules, they'll be allowed into those cities. There'll probably be access to food and clean water and amenities and something similar to a normal life, in those cities. But you'll be completely enslaved in that environment. Outside the cities, I think that you'll see a martial law sort of situation, and insurgency for years to come.
I mean, we've been talking about an economic collapse, the central bankers, the elite. What can people do right now to prepare for what is coming? What do you suggest people do at this point if this crisis is coming up very soon?
Well, the best thing I believe they could do, especially if they have some savings in the bank, would be to invest in your own productivity. Focus on being able to produce your own necessities, food, clean water, shelter, security, electricity. If you can produce, the more necessities you can produce for yourself, and the more you can remove yourself from dependency on the grid, the better off you will be if there is a crisis. And even if you think I'm completely out of my gourd, I'm completely nuts, and none of this is going to happen, you're still better off being able to do those things. It's a better life. It's a cheaper life. It's not a bad way to live. I live that way. And even if I'm completely wrong, hey, you're more self-sufficient. And so really that's the best option. Also, of course, there's, in any economic crisis, there is a window of time. There are windows in which precious metals are the best option as far as a currency. So I would suggest that people put at least 10% of their savings into gold or silver.
Should people keep a weapon and cash on hand for this upcoming crisis?
Sure. Yeah. I'm a big proponent. Actually, it's one other thing I should mention that's important is it's not enough just to be relatively self-sufficient, because nobody can do everything themselves. So the next stage after producing a lot of these things yourself is to start building mutual aid groups and working with others, and setting up a network of people who are self-sufficient. So a community, because that's really the future in my mind is going to be independent communities all over the country, localized, self-sufficient, and able to weather the economic storm. And if we can get enough of those communities out there, then that makes America economically redundant. It makes us safer, and it also allows us the ability to fight back against any kind of authoritarianism that does arise. Because if you're dependent on the system, you have zero chance of fighting back against it. If you are self-sufficient and you have community, then there is a chance that you can fight back.
Brandon, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
You can visit me at alt-market.com or -market.com. That's altmarket.com.
Brandon, once again, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on the show.